Always trust.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Is that going to
Calling it a ridiculous trade deal, U.S. President Donald Trump withdraws from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, just 3 days into his administration. Most assume the deal is now dead. But challenging U.S. global leadership, the 11 remaining Pacific Rim countries, led by Japan, forge ahead regardless. And just as President Trump heightens fears of a trade war by imposing steel and aluminium tariffs, a revamped version of the TPP is signed in Santiago, Chile, sending a powerful message that free trade can and will go ahead without the United States. The Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP-11 for short, includes Canada, Mexico, Japan, Malaysia, Australia, Peru, New Zealand, Chile, Brunei, Singapore, and Vietnam, in a deal to dramatically lower tariffs and trade barriers. Together, they cover 500 million people in the most dynamic region of the world economy, more than 13% of global GDP, worth more than $10 trillion. With the U.S., it would have been 40%, but the new TPP is already attracting potential new members, like South Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, possibly even the UK post-Brexit. A free trade deal once viewed by Washington and Japan as a counterweight to China's growing economic might is now being hailed as an antidote to U.S. protectionism. Talk to Al Jazeera sat down in Santiago with the signatories of the world's newest trade bloc. We start with the host, Chile's outgoing foreign minister. Foreign Minister Heraldo Muñoz, thank you so much for talking to Al Jazeera. I'd like to start by asking you, how significant is the timing of this agreement?
I think it is very timely because the world is witnessing an increase in protectionist measures and protectionist temptations, I would say, on the part of some countries, the withdrawal of the UK from the Brexit, the US withdrawal from the original TPP are examples of that, and the possibility that there would be unilateral tariffs imposed on some products, as we have heard. So I think it comes at the right time by saying open trade is alive. These 11 countries that represent 500 million people, about 15% of global trade, and about $10 trillion added up, the 11 economies opt for continuing trading with others and doing it in a progressive way.
Well, some skeptics would say, though, that this agreement is not even the shadow of its former self, that without the United States, it really doesn't have any teeth. What do you say to that?
Well, I think there's a lot of teeth because, I mean, when you have economies as important as Japan, as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so many others that are involved, you have really very important countries involved. And when you have even countries like Mexico, that is the 8th economy in the world, I mean, we're talking about very powerful countries. Chile is also very active globally. You know, we have $130 billion in exports last year. So we are significant countries, and we put enough teeth. We would have liked the United States to have stayed, but they took the sovereign decision under President Trump to withdraw.
Some would say, in fact, that by withdrawing from this agreement, from the TPP, the United States is really at a turning point in its global leadership, or some would say lack of global leadership. Would you agree?
Well, it's not what one would have expected from a Republican administration that in the past used to be always pro-global trade. And But times have changed, and perhaps globalization has not proven to be beneficial to everyone. But that is not because of the nature of globalization, it's because the nature of production and the global economy has changed. It's more and more innovation, more and more knowledge, so that the industries of the 20th century are, of course, suffering the costs of these technological changes. And that, I guess, led some states in the United States to vote for Mr. Trump because they felt left behind. What we have to do is to prove that globalization is not a problem, that innovation is the key, is adding value, is including everyone into the benefits of trade. And that's why we dedicate a full chapter to small and medium enterprises in the CPTPP.
Well, let me ask you about that precisely, because there are a lot of people that are very concerned that this trade agreement is just yet another one that is going to work in favor of big business at the expense of the little man, of the working class, of the middle class, of small and medium-sized businesses as well. Why should they believe that this new trade agreement is different?
Well, because I think that there's enough contents into it to ensure that women entrepreneurs, for example, will have a chance to have access to credit, to have access to marketing, to have access to the ability to export to all of these markets, because there is a clear and mandatory elements in the agreement to respect the environment and labor rights. So that in the end, I think this is, as the title says, the most comprehensive and progressive trade agreement that has ever been signed.
Well, what about this agreement? It was done in record time. It took a lot of political will and a lot of flexibility. So how different is this one from the original one?
Well, it has still the high standards. We didn't remove one comma from the chapters of access to markets, because that would have meant a total renegotiation of the agreement. And that was something that was very interesting to Chile, because, for example, through this agreement, we are going to gain access to the Japanese market that we don't have in the bilateral agreement with Japan. More than 1,000 products are going to be increasing to Japan, to Canada, to Malaysia, to Vietnam, to several countries. We include new areas like public purchases. And there's also the element of creating this global chains of value by changing the rules of origin. For example, a product coming from one of the other 10 countries will be considered as a national input. That way one can process and elaborate other products and send them to the other 10 countries, and so that the production chains begin to be linked, and that is very positive. So we are very optimistic.
So in some ways, especially for smaller countries, this New Deal is better without the United States than with the United States, that had imposed some very, very strict conditions, particularly on the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, the adaptations that we made precisely were enabled because the United States left. They had asked for certain conditions that did not accommodate fully some countries. Chile was okay because in the bilateral agreement with the United States, we had a lot of the elements that were new for other countries. I won't give names, but for example, there were countries that had zero protection for the data for biological pharmaceutical products, and they had to increase to 5. Chile already had 5 years of protection for that data in the agreement with the United States. So eliminating that evidently caused less political pressure in the countries. When we removed about 20 norms in the original TPP that the United States had particularly pushed for. But we had to do, as you said, a very quick rearrangement, which wasn't easy. It took a lot of political will, because not only did we have to change the implementation agreement, because the implementation agreement required that more than 85% of the GDP of the countries would ratify it before it would enter into force. Now it's only 6 out of the 11. But not only did we change that, we changed all these other elements relative to gender. We strengthened the aspects related to labor rights and environment. And all of that, I think, made it a better agreement. Not because the United States left, because of the reality that we wanted to continue on. And in order to continue on, we had to make it a more attractive agreement. And I think we ended up with a better agreement. But not because the US left, but because of the reality that we did not want to waste the years of negotiation of a high standard agreement.
New Zealand's trade minister says the deal isn't perfect.
You have given this trade agreement 7 out of 10 as the rating. Why is that? Why did you sign it if it's not worth a 10?
Well, our 10 out of 10 agreement is with Australia, which is probably the best trade agreement in the world, and we have nil tariffs on any product. We have free flow of people and investment. So compared with our agreement with Australia, it's not as good. Compared with a lot of other agreements in the world, it's very, very good. It has good provisions relating to the right of governments to regulate, to protect the environment. I'm a former climate change minister in New Zealand. I'm also the Minister for the Environment as well as the Minister of Trade currently. So it's important to New Zealand that it has progressive elements that enable us to properly regulate for public health, public education, environment, as well as providing benefits for businesses, be they small or large.
Well, for small countries or countries with small populations such as yours, is this actually a better deal without the United States?
Probably not overall. It did enable us to renegotiate some clauses which were problematic for New Zealand. For example, extensions to patent terms, extensions to copyright. We managed to narrow the breadth of these investor-state dispute clauses, all of which is good. But of course, America is also a large and wealthy economy, so at one level, the trade benefits from the agreement aren't as great as they were when America was in the agreement.
So is it still really a good agreement? Only, I shouldn't say only, but it is 13 to 14% of the global GDP versus 40% with the United States. Was it worth it?
Well, there's 500 million people in the CPTPP countries. New Zealand is only 4.5 million of those, so 495 million of those people lie in the other CPTPP countries. That's an enormous market for New Zealand goods and services. Of course, it's reciprocal. Those people get the opportunity to sell their goods and services into New Zealand. So yes, overall, it's a really good deal.
Do you think that this agreement, as some have suggested, serves as an antidote to this protectionist trend that we're seeing in the world?
I absolutely do. I think that CPTPP is more important than it was a year ago. This rise of protectionism is worrisome. Some of the mechanisms under the World Trade Organization, like the appellate body, which is the dispute court, if you like, for disputes under the WTO, they're under threat. This is an alternative set of rules, and countries who think like New Zealand or the other countries that are in CPTPP have got a different route where they can club together in a friendly manner, actually, and facilitate the growth of their own economies for the benefit of their people.
Well, what about China? I know that Japan certainly sees it as a threat, not just for trade, but even geopolitically. And that's one of the reasons why it was so keen on pushing this agreement forward. But other countries who are in this new bloc actually have agreements with China. Is China going to be left out of it forever, or is it possible that it might join too?
We've already got a free trade agreement with
Exactly.
China. We were the first country in the world to have a free trade agreement with China, and has worked for both New Zealand and for China. We don't see China as a threat. We recognise them as being a superpower and that they have a proper place in the world, and we, through our trading relationship with them, have improved our relationship with China to our mutual benefit.
For countries like Malaysia, the new TPP has many goals, but keeping China at bay is not one of them.
Japan has been key in pushing this forward. It really helped spearhead the last year. But Japan has also made it clear that it sees this as more than just a trade agreement, but rather as a way to counterbalance the growing geopolitical power of China, which is its main, certainly its trade rival, in a region that is becoming more unstable. Does Malaysia have the same view?
Well, I hate to get into any discussions about geopolitics. For us, we are a trading nation. And for us, the global market is our market. So we don't particularly say that, we want to just have agreements with the US or the EU or Japan or ASEAN. For us, every opportunity to open up markets, we will use them. And we've been using free trade agreements, regional trade agreements, and to a certain extent also the WTO to open up markets for our businesses. So we don't necessarily see the TPP actually, from our point of view, a geopolitical instrument.
Are you surprised that the United States, that President Trump and his Treasury Secretary have suddenly had a change of heart, or appear to be having a change of heart, and are talking about having conversations to see if they can rejoin?
Well, I'm not totally surprised, because we know that this is an agreement which actually benefits the US also. We know that there are many quarters in the US, especially the business circles, and then there are also administration officials who think that the TPP is a good deal for the US, and it was a matter of time that there will be some rethink and that the US may want to come back to the agreement.
But it's not the same agreement as it was, for certain.
Certainly.
It's probably
so.
less to Donald Trump's liking now than it was originally.
Yes, but I think if there is a request for total renegotiations, I don't think there is that appetite among the other parties. After 5 years, we've got a very balanced package. And if you're saying that that balanced package needs to be now renegotiated, then it is almost like getting back to square one.
Malaysia would not be in favor of that?
Well, it's not just Malaysia. I don't think anyone else, I could safely say, would be looking for total renegotiations of the agreement.
While President Trump dismisses free trade deals as bad for jobs, Canada's trade minister enthusiastically embraces globalization.
How different is this agreement really in those terms? I mean, all trade agreements say that they're going to benefit the working man, and at the end, they very often do exactly the opposite. Why should this agreement really be different?
Let me give you three basic examples. It is the first trade agreement in the world where you have a dedicated chapter on small and medium-sized businesses, making sure that we recognize that small and medium-sized businesses have a key role in our economy, and that we should take every step possible to make sure that they can benefit from these new markets that are going to be open. When I look at labor, for example, making sure that countries would maintain labor standards, that they will not retreat from international convention to become more competitive. We want to have a level playing field, and making sure, for example, on the environment, that the agreement would maintain a high standard when it comes to the environment, and these chapters are enforceable.
Well, Canada is the closest country to the United States. You are each other's largest trading partners, and yet you are, some would say, in danger of entering into a trade war. Canada's very angry at the fact that President Trump is planning to increase duties on the imports of aluminium and steel. Does the TPP plus 11 do anything to offset that?
Well, I would say there's never been a better time to diversify. I think Canadians understand that the U.S. Will always be our first trading partner because of the geography and the size of the U.S. economy. More than 70% of our goods and services are exchanged with the United States. But that being said, people also understand that we need to diversify. So today is a very powerful message that whilst we recognize that the U.S. will always be our first trading partner, that the economy also in the world is shifting. It's shifting towards Asia-Pacific.
What about China? I mean, this was seen as a deal to try to offset the growing geopolitical and economic strength of China. Do you still see it that way?
Well, I would say it's, when it comes to Canada, we have exploratory discussion about a potential free trade agreement with China. That being said, we also believe, like I said, when we're in Vina del Mar with the countries of the CPTPP, that it was in our best interest, the best interest of our citizens, to make sure that we would write together the rules of trade in Asia-Pacific.
And not let China do it.
Well, that we would, for those who are part of that, make sure that these trade rules would reflect the values that we have about, being open, being predictable, being enforceable. I think that you'll see Canada and other nations continue to engage with China. It's the second largest economy. So those are not mutually exclusive. Clearly, we're sending a signal today that Canada is very much a Pacific nation. We want to engage. Whilst we're doing that with the CPTPP country, we obviously remain open to trade negotiations with other countries in the region.
What if Donald Trump tomorrow says that he's changed his mind and he wants to sign up again? He wants to be a part of this club. Would Canada agree to rewrite this treaty yet again in order to appease the United States? There were 22 clauses that were taken out that had been put there, most of them certainly to appease the United States. What about now? Is the United States in a strong position to twist the arms of those who have signed this agreement?
Well, I would say that we have said for the countries that may want to join the CPTPP that we would welcome other countries joining. Now the priority, as you would appreciate, is signing and ratification for the agreement to come into force. A number of countries have expressed interest to join, whether it's Korea, whether even the United Kingdom has said that they'd be interested to join. So for us now, I think the CPTPP countries, the focus is very much on now, whilst keeping an open door policy for other countries that may want to join in the future, understanding that we want to preserve the high standard of the agreement, the progressive nature of the agreement, but certainly expanding the agreement to cover more countries and more economies. Canada will always be there to promote a fair, inclusive trade and making sure that the progressive elements, that trade really reflects the 21st century, reflects the values of our people, reflects what trade should be in this day and age. Trade which relate to people, that each and every citizen that we meet, each and every youth, each and every women entrepreneur, in our case Indigenous people, can see, you know what, this is working for me. This is really the mission we have, and I think this is a step in the right direction.
Well, I hope this trade agreement will indeed live up to its promises. Minister Champagne,
thank you very much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
It's a pleasure.